want to do a little bit of a deep dive with you today, because these days there's one main billionaire in Trump's orbit that we talk about a lot. But right now, I want to talk about one who's now circling the president closer than ever, though he doesn't have as big of a spotlight on him. Because it seems like after years of flip-flopping or playing both sides on issues like free speech, content moderation, and diversity, Mark Zuckerberg and Meta along with him, they're going all in on MAGA. And to fully appreciate and understand the situation, we got to go back to 2016 when Donald Trump won the presidency for the first time. And as you might remember, there were a lot of people trying to explain what happened, with one of them being Facebook. With critics at the time not only painting the platform as an online echo chamber, but also blaming it for the near unchecked spread of fake news, disinformation, and conspiracy theories that they say propelled Trump to victory. And as far as Mark Zuckerberg, of course, Facebook's founder and CEO, he defended the company at first, right, denying that the platform had any impact on the election. And in fact, he called the claim that fake news on Facebook influenced the election crazy. But then, just a few days later, he was writing an apologetic post announcing a series of steps meant to deal with its spread, saying, "The bottom line is, we take misinformation seriously." And with that, he previewed Facebook's fact-checking program, which would actually be launched just a month later. But of course, despite that, the criticism, it kept coming, with the same outlets continually reporting on the shortcomings of the company's fact-checking efforts. And by 2018, for example, the company was increasingly being blamed for contributing to the ethnic cleansing and genocide in Myanmar, with reporting at the time beginning to show how the country's military had waged a systematic multi-year propaganda campaign on the platform, with then, not long after that, Facebook again apologizing, admitting that the site had been used to incite violence. And that led to Zuckerberg expanding moderation teams and better defining rules around acceptable speech, with him also sometime that year speaking to Stephen Levy, who wrote a book called Facebook, The Inside Story, about how the solution to disinformation and hate speech was more content moderation, with him reportedly telling the author, "It is no longer enough to give people tools to say what they want and then just let our community flag them and try to respond after the fact," saying we need to take a more active role in making sure that the tools aren't misused. "I think we're doing the right thing, it's just that we should have done it sooner." But then, a year later, facing accusations of censorship by conservative politicians, including Trump, Zuckerberg seemingly began swinging back the other way, with him stirring controversy at the time, right? Facebook refusing to take down a Trump ad, making false claims about Joe Biden, with Zuckerberg then defending the decision in a speech at Georgetown, hailing his site as a bastion of free expression. And this as he seemingly aimed to rewrite the true origin story of the platform with a new founding myth, talking about how when he was in college, the country had gone to war in Iraq. And with that, saying that he felt we were acting without hearing a lot of important perspectives, and claiming those early years shaped his belief that giving everyone a voice empowers the powerless and pushes society to be better over time, which appears to be a very interesting revisionist history version of the creation of Facebook, because if you look into it, he initially made Face Smash, which is a website where you could rate the attractiveness of their female classmates. And he did so by hacking into the so-called Facebooks of the different houses at Harvard, with him even writing in a journal published on the site itself at the time. "The Kirkland Facebook is open on my computer desktop, and some of these people have pretty horrendous Facebook pics. I almost want to put some of these faces next to pictures of farm animals and have people vote on which is more attractive." But in any case, with that history set aside and a newly connected origin story to take its place, Zuckerberg just kept pushing back, with us then seeing things like in 2020, Zuckerberg claiming that Facebook's commitment to free speech was a reason to not act on inflammatory posts from Trump regarding the Black Lives Matter protests. Though also, notably around the same time, you had activists and human rights groups who used Facebook to document human rights abuses in the Middle East, accusing the company of deleting their accounts. All while, in the United States, Zuckerberg defended Facebook's policies and resisted pressure to act more forcefully against hate speech. Though a big thing, I will say, is that the company still had a hate speech policy at the time, and Zuck claimed that they were proactively removing roughly 90% of it. But then, something changed again. Biden won the election, Trump lost, and hundreds of his supporters invaded the Capitol. And again, Facebook got some of the blame, and we saw them ban Trump indefinitely for the role that he played in inciting the insurrection, with Zuck then soon after telling investors that the company was considering steps to straight up reduce political content across Facebook, which was done shortly after. But of course, that didn't stop fact checkers, researchers, and the media from finding ways that the platform was still being used to spread misinformation and increase political polarization. And come 2024, you had Zuck getting brutalized before the US Senate, then reinventing his image, and last August, he wrote that letter to Congress accusing the Biden administration of pressuring what had by then become Meta into censoring more COVID-19 content than he said he felt comfortable with, as well as then announcing that he wouldn't repeat the contributions he made in 2020 to support nonpartisan electoral infrastructure because the gifts made him appear not neutral. Though notably, that spending was also part of the reason that Trump accused Zuckerberg of plotting against him during the 2020 election, something that also reportedly involved threats to throw him in jail for the rest of his life. But then, despite all that, within weeks of Trump's re-election, Zuckerberg was dining with the then president-elect at Mar-a-Lago. And it was also at this time, according to reporting by the New York Times, that Trump advisor Stephen Miller told Zuckerberg that he had an opportunity to help reform America, but it would be on Trump's terms, with Zuck there reportedly signaling to Miller and his colleagues, including other senior Trump advisors, that he would do nothing to obstruct their agenda. And in fact, according to the Times, Zuck reportedly began preparing to make sweeping changes to Meta to, in the words of the Times, remake Meta for the Trump era. And notably, with that, the Times interviewed more than a dozen current and former Meta employees, as well as executives and advisors to Zuckerberg. And they reportedly described his shift as serving a a dual purpose. Right, on one hand, it's about positioning Meta for the current political climate with Trump and Republican power ascendant. But also too, and maybe even more notably, people close to him reportedly say that the shift reflects Zuckerberg's personal views of how his company should be run, right? Views that he no longer wanted to keep quiet. With all that, according to the Times, this whole process, it was highly unusual. Because in the past, Meta would modify policies affecting its apps by inviting employees, civic leaders, and others to weigh in. And so with that, the process would generally take months, but this time it was a quote 6-week sprint, blindsiding even employees on his policy and integrity team. With then, on January 2nd, Meta appointing Republican Joel Kaplan to lead its global policy team to implement the changes. And then, a few days later, he added 3 new men to the board, with one, of course, being Trump's friend Dana White. And on January 7th, most of Meta's 72,000 employees reportedly learned about the rest of Zuckerberg's plans along with the rest of the world. With Zuck, of course, famously announcing that it was killing its fact-checking program in favor of a community notes system similar to X's. Or with him also revealing that the political content would no longer be suppressed, and finally declaring that the company would be loosening restrictions on how people can talk about contentious social issues such as immigration, gender, and sexuality. And notably here, all of that came not just in a written statement from Joel Kaplan, but it was also announced by Zuckerberg in a video that had him say,
"After Trump first got elected in 2016, the legacy media wrote nonstop about how misinformation was a threat to democracy. We tried in good faith to address those concerns without becoming the arbiters of truth. But the fact-checkers have just been too politically biased and have destroyed more trust than they've created, especially in the US. The recent elections also feel like a cultural tipping point towards once again prioritizing speech. So we're going to get back to our roots and focus on reducing mistakes, simplifying our policies, and restoring free expression on our platforms."
Right, and then, in the days after, the full extent of the changes became clear. The company ending its hate speech policy, now calling it hateful conduct, with this policy now allowing posts saying you hate people of certain races, religions, and sexual orientations. And that including permitting, quote, allegations of mental illness or abnormality when based on gender or sexual orientation. With also an Intercept investigation claiming examples of other newly permissible speech highlighted in Meta training materials, including immigrants are grubby, filthy pieces of shit, and gays are freaks. With a seeing Jillian York, Director for International Freedom of Expression at the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and notably someone who has criticized Meta for what she described as over-moderation in the past, saying, "These examples demonstrate that Meta's policy changes are political in nature and not intended to simply allow more freedom of expression." And then beyond that, we've seen things like the company also reportedly removing the transgender and non-binary themes on Messenger. Instagram at one point blocked LGBTQ hashtags and marked them as sexually suggestive content, though Meta said afterwards that it was a mistake. And then off the platform's facilities managers were reportedly instructed to remove tampons from men's bathroom at Meta's offices in Silicon Valley, Texas, and New York. And of course, the company also announcing that it would be ending its work on diversity, equity, and inclusion, with reportedly a memo being sent to staff referring to the fact that, quote, the legal and policy landscape surrounding diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts in the United States is changing. And, since then, Zuck's kind of just been handing Trump more wins. Or you have Meta paying $25 million to settle a Trump lawsuit dating back to his ban from Facebook. Zuck's been praising the Trump administration openly, and now he's reportedly hunting for a home in DC to be closer to Trump. Though, I will say notably, right, Trump and his team, not fully buying it maybe. Because according to Rolling Stone, various members of his inner circle are skeptical of Zuck's MAGA makeover, with one senior Trump administration official even reportedly telling the outlet there is a lot more ass-kissing that needs to be done, saying he just needs to prove himself. It's a good start, but he can't just snap his finger and make the past not happen. And so, with all that, I'd love to know your thoughts on the situation in general, but also with Zuckerberg and what we've seen with a number of multi-millionaires or billionaires, do you think this is kind of the evolution, the final form? They finally feel free to be this version of themselves? Or do you see this more as them being shapeshifters? We're going whichever way the wind blows for better financial or personal gain. Hey, thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this clip from the full Philip DeFranco show. And also, a big thanks to Squarespace for sponsoring our Clips channel. Turn your passion into profit over at squarespace.com/Phil, or use the QR code. Because whether you're launching a business or a lucrative side hustle, your website is your digital business card. It's the only space where you control the story, no algorithms or distractions. And with Squarespace, it's so easy because they got a ton of stunning professional templates with drag and drop editing that makes site design incredibly simple, no coding required. So get started for free at squarespace.com/Phil, or scan the QR code on screen and use code Phil for 10% off when ready to launch. Squarespace.com/Phil.